Hello out there, all you book lovers in booktube land, and welcome to another episode of Tristan and the Classics. I do hope that life is treating you bumps-a-daisy and that you have splendid things on the horizon of your future. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at William Golding's The Lord of the Flies, a magnificent book for which he received the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1983. There's a lot to take from this book, so stick around and let's get stuck in, shall we? The Lord of the Flies by William Golding actually contributed to him getting the Nobel Prize in Literature in the year 1983. This is a really good book. Have you read it? It's a real modern classic. You may have gone through it at school, or it might be one of those books which is on your bookshelf that you keep meaning to get around to but haven't yet. It doesn't quite take your fancy. Well, if that's the case, I really encourage you to get this book down and read it. It won't take you long. It's 225 pages long. And the story itself is brisk and simple, not overly wordy. It's a great story. But, and here's the big but, it's a great book if you want to start delving into literature beneath the surface. It's a book where you can really start going deeper and reading for the meanings between the lines. This book's not entirely allegorical, although you will easily pick up that sense of it to start with. But an allegorical tale tends to have a one-to-one relation, so every character means something, every significant article means something. This is more a parable in the sense that it's a story in which there is a lesson. There are certainly some allegorical maybe types that you can look for, but it's not directly one for one for every character in there. And the way you'll interpret it will depend on your outlook on life. You will read significantly into the meaning of this book by your own experiences. Now, William Golding certainly himself had ideas regarding the meaning of this book. But William Golding, although he says he was a religious man, he did say he was not religious as in conforming to a single religion, but more he was interested in sort of the inner religiousness of the human spirit, the sort of innate spirituality that people sense they have in connection with this world. So what's the book about before we dive into some of its meanings perhaps? So, The Lord of the Flies starts with a group of children, all boys, being marooned on a desert island after a plane crash. And we start with just two of them, Ralph and Piggy, whose name we never ever get given. It's just his nickname, Piggy, that we find out. We start with them sort of dangling, trying to get them to pick themselves up after the crash above the scar that cuts through the trees where the plane has crashed. And what it details is how this group of boys inherently begin to make some kind of commune. It's not deliberate, but it's inherent because they've come from civilization, and so in their minds they've got a way of thinking about how society is supposed to be structured. And that all starts when Ralph finds a conch. This conch will feature all the way through the book, a conch being a very large, sizable seashell. And with this conch, he blows, makes a noise, and all the children, who not all of them know each other, come out of the woods, find their way to the beach, and they all collect together. And they start holding meetings, and the rule is whoever holds the conch gets to talk without being interrupted. And because Ralph found the conch and he seems trustworthy, he's appointed leader of the tribe, as they call it. Now, the book primarily focuses on the sort of the nemesis idea of two main characters who they sort of respect each other, but at the same time they're enemies. It's the two boys vying for chief control. So you have Ralph, who found the conch and is a friend of Piggy, and then you have Jack. And Jack is sort of your bad guy. He doesn't start off like that, but he soon says that we need to get food, and he takes a group of boys who all belong to a choir. This might be significant when you go forward in the book. They all belong to a choir and come with the same garb on, same uniform. And he says we need to be the hunters, and they go out to hunt a pig. And Jack almost catches a pig, but he can't stomach killing it, and the pig escapes. And then something changes in Jack's mind. He hates the fact that he didn't kill the pig, and he slams this knife into a tree and says, "No mercy next time." From this point forward, you begin to see a division in the characters that make up the tribe. You've got some who want to keep the law and order and be civilized, in inverted commas, and their focus is on keeping a fire burning on a mountain that's on the island, so as a signal, so that humans on ships, adults passing, might see the signal, come on the island, find them, and they'll be saved. But Jack and his gang think it's more important to hunt and get food and just live in the moment. And eventually there is a split, and then there's a clash between the two rival groups. Some atrocious things happen. And then where do you get this phrase, Lord of the Flies? By the way, I don't know if you know, but in Hebrew, the Lord of the Flies word is Beelzebub, which of course became synonymous with the devil. It's actually what the Jews called a particular god of the Philistines in Ekron originally, but that's where you get it. And the Lord of the Flies turns out to be a pig's head, because the boys, they begin to develop superstitions while they're on the island, that there's a beast that comes out at night to get them. And because of this, Jack and his mates decide that we'll kill a pig, but we need to, so that we're not eaten by the beast, we need to keep the head of the pig for the beast. And the first kill they make, they put the head of the pig on this big stick, and over time, flies come onto it. One of the characters is sort of enthralled by it. He's on his own, and he's just staring at this pig's head, and it talks to him. Now obviously that talking is in his imagination, it's not real, but it's swarming with flies. Now the idea of servicing this beast, as in always providing a head from every kill for it, never leaves the boys. They live in fear that the beast could turn on them, and they need to make sure they provide something for it. But this is compounded by an event that takes place when a dead airman falls onto the mountain where they were making smoke as a signal, but this has now gone out. And that airman, although dead, is still attached to his parachute, so when the wind catches it, especially in the night, it seems to move, the body moves, and the boys think this is the beast and they won't go near it. And that features in their belief system. And eventually the book climaxes, like I say, with the clash of the two tribes and interpretations of what the beast is, etc., etc. That's the book, and I'm not going to ruin how it ends, but it really is gripping. It's great. It's basically, take Treasure Island or the Coral Island. They're all adventure and, tales of bravado, but they all end well. William Golding wanted to write a book where he said, if boys were on a desert island, what would really happen? So now, after talking about that, let's just go into some of the meanings that can be found. Now, how to start talking about the underlying ideas, meanings, the parable of this book is not easy to do, because, like I say, depending on your experiences, depending on your worldview, you're going to come up with slightly different ideas. There's an underlying theme that I think everyone will conclude upon, but there are variations upon a theme. The way that the music sounds to you will be different to the way it sounds to the person next to you. But let's look at some of the symbolism and ideas that I certainly found in this book, and if you've read it, leave some comments below. So, first of all, the conch. So the conch is frequently used, and when the tribes divide, one side still respects the conch, and that conch stands for the symbol of authority, the symbol of order within a civilization. Rather than everything just being a free-for-all and people fighting, the conch, if you held it, you get to speak. And Ralph as leader and Jack as the other powerful character, they both hold the conch a lot and are listened to. Whereas others are not natural leaders and they hold the conch and then they don't know quite what to say and they hand the conch back to Ralph or to Jack. So that symbols the need for a point of authority if you're going to have civilization. and it has to be a recognised point of authority for the whole group. Partway through, when the groups divide, Jack says to Ralph that Conch has no power on this end of the island. And that's because Jack is not necessarily elected to be a leader. He goes his own way and draws a following after him because of his bravery and because of his promises of providing for things here and now. That's part to do with the conch. Other theme that's in this is the innate brutality of the human creature. Because when they all land on the island, they've all recently come from civilization, so they think and have a way of behaving. In fact, it says the British, we're British, we're best at everything. And that's a tongue-in-cheek comment, maybe sort of making a hat tip to the idea that the West thinks that their civilization is better. But really, are they any different to anybody else? Because there is a descent into savagery in this book. The boys start with their uniforms, looking smart and bathing, and then they stop bathing and eventually they become naked and covered in tribal paint, like savages, it says. And when it says savages, it's not referring necessarily to any other culture, but being like animals and throwing off the clothing of civilization, as it were. Now, this is really interesting because how evil are humans? What you find in this is, we mentioned Jack earlier, he wants to kill a pig, and he doesn't the first time, but after that he says, I'll show no mercy, and he becomes obsessed with the idea of killing. There's also a character called Roger, who turns out to be like the henchman of Jack. Roger is sadistic. There is this terrifying scene, appalling scene in the book concerning the killing of a particular pig, and all the kids have dived on it. Ralph and Piggy are not involved here. All the hunters have dived on it and they're savaging it, and Roger gets this stick and rams it into the pig, and there is a very disturbing pleasure that he gets from hearing it squeal, and it's very symbolic as well. It's talked of in almost rape terms, which please don't let that put you off the book. It's not gratuitous in that sense, but Golding is talking about humans descending into the savagery they can perpetrate on other living beings. And that's why there's just this subtle hint towards that idea. But you see this constant breaking down of the boys who follow Jack and the way they turn on one of the other characters. Now, combined with this savagery is another idea to do with religion. So you've got the sacrifice of the head, the lord of the flies, because the pig's head goes on the stick, the spike, and it gets covered in flies. This idea of appeasing a beast. There's something religious about this. Now again, this is Jack's end of the island, whom most of the boys end up going to, leaving Ralph practically on his own. Now, what we get here is the idea of nature that is larger than us. Because nature is bigger than us humans. Even with all our scientific advances, our inner nature and the world in which we exist is still too large for us to fully control. And even sometimes the most scientific of people can still get the tremors down a dark alley or in a spooky building. It's something that's sort of innate within us. But that has been abused by religions in the past, and there is a form of animism that the boys set up here. You've got the beast that has to have a sacrifice given to it in order to appease it so it doesn't kill them. It's sort of the ancient kind of idea of the gods. You had to always be appeasing them. And it's no accident that the boys who follow Jack were all the ones from the choir, which is a religious group of boys. So that's an interesting idea. Now, they make their own fire. This is really important because the fire, you occasionally see the smoke going up. Now, fire, from Ralph's perspective, is something that needs to be made so that a signal can call people who are passing by on boats. Whereas for Jack and his clan, whenever Ralph observes the fire, it's a cooking fire. The purpose of the fire is to cook meat. It's for self. And there's a lot about that idea of religion which is self-serving. And he uses the idea of the beast to control the boys. He says he's the great hunter, he's the one that can save them. Almost gives you reminiscences of Nimrod here in the Bible, the mighty hunter in opposition to God. And he uses the idea of the beast to keep everyone under his control. So there's that element of using suspicion and superstitious religion to enthrall the masses that you'll find here in sort of this setup. But I want to come back to fire because there is another fire, and that's run by Ralph and Piggy and a couple of others. Now, his purpose for the fire, and he's obsessed with it all the way through, we have to keep the fire going and make it smoky. They use wet leaves so that we can be saved. Now, what's interesting about this, and I encourage you to think about this as you go through it, is he and Piggy recognise that there is something beyond their immediate situation. Just satisfying our material needs, as symbolised by killing the pig, hunting and eating, they realise there is something beyond the horizon, something invisible that can't be seen and that provides salvation. Now that certainly sounds like a biblical message, doesn't it? And so both fires are like sacrifices in religion, but they go up to two different gods. There is the unseen God, who I suppose is symbolised by the grown-ups who can bring salvation and take them away from the island. And then there's Beelzebub, the Lord of the Flies, which symbolises a decadent, self-indulgent, materialistic attitude. And yet through all of this, keep relating it back to modern civilization. Where do people offer up their sacrifices to? How many look towards a spiritual need for something higher? How many others focus on the here and now materialistic indulging of self? What are the consequences of those ideas? And how important a role do they play in society? Is the inner savagery that we all have, because even Ralph, he is tempted by certain things that happen in this book and shows a bit of a barbarous streak. But what gives him the ability to not succumb totally to savagery? And in fact, it questions the idea, where do you get an objective standard of what civilization is? Can you criticise the boys who become more violent and savage? Can you legitimately criticise them? It's all well and good judging it by civilization now, as we know it, but if you were literally isolated in a community, what gives you objective rules? Are we determined to all be beasts and decadent? Or can we resist that urge? Is there something within our spirit, inherent somehow, that wants to rise above it? And what role does hope play in all of that? What role does seeing a bigger picture than your immediate life play in all of that? Now, there are other things within this book that you can also look for the parable in and a deeper meaning. I'm thinking specifically right at this moment of the weather, storms and the like that go on, and the wind and the heat. Particularly the storms though, and the reaction of the boys to sort of a tremendous tropical thunderstorm that happens over the island one night. But I want to say something specifically about the character of Piggy. We never know Piggy's name, not his real name. He's always known by Piggy. People often mock him. He's got spectacles. None of the other boys have spectacles. And he's completely lost without them. And partway through the book, one of the lenses is broken. So for the majority of the book, he's only got one lens. Sort of this myopia. He's got this myopic vision of the literal world. But that's deeply symbolic of who his character represents. He's a bit of an oddball. He doesn't just fall into the categories of the others. And sometimes he's a bit highfalutin. However, he's very scientific. It's only because of him that they can get fire. And he has some interesting observations and he uses his intelligence quite a lot. He is really a personification of science in society. Because although they need him for things like fire, although he has a particular way of seeing things, he's myopic. He can't focus clearly. He's sort of short-sighted on how society works. He never rises to the top. He's needed and abused, but neither can he read human nature correctly. And you do sense William Golding is saying that while science is great in society and is a key figure in it, it doesn't actually do much to explain human experience. It explains the natural world and its workings, but it doesn't seem to have a real handle or understanding on just how humans work. And you see this regularly in history, particularly the 20th century. There's an incident where Piggy is involved in a situation which he wants to separate himself from and call it an accident. He didn't realise the group could get as bad as they did. Now that could be similar to science, which has made some ghastly inventions. Not just good, let's take the bad, like the atomic bomb and weaponry and warfare. That's brought by science to the table and has caused millions of deaths. But the scientists themselves could say, well, that's not my fault. That's how society have used it. But that's a very sort of short-sighted, colourblind way of looking at how humans really are. And how is Piggy featured in all of this? What becomes of Piggy if they go from more of a civilized, logical way of thinking to a more innately disturbed, decadent situation? What role does he play there? How much power can he truly possess? This is all sort of looked at by Golding in this book. And I tell you what, there must be endless essays written upon the character of Piggy, as well as on Ralph and Jack. This book is brilliant. If you want to start, if you would like to start getting into literature and not just reading a story, but you're thinking, I want to dig beneath the surface, read this book. It is a great training ground for that, because you will inherently sense there is a deeper meaning to the story. All you have to do as you go through this book is say, what does this make me think of in modern society? How bad are humans? What elevates us above animals? What are the messages of people's interactions with fear and awe with nature? All of those things. Just ask yourself, who could this person be in society? What group of people? And see where you come to with that. Whatever your answers, don't ask, are they right? Just stand in amazement at what you can get from a book that can open up your own worldview, that can make you think about the world you inhabit through a parable. So that was my rundown of The Lord of the Flies by William Golding. Have you read it? Leave your comments below on your interpretation. And if you haven't read it, tell me, are you going to read it? And when you do, come back and leave a comment. I really appreciate you watching this video. Please remember to hit the subscribe. And if you enjoy my videos and you think there's much to be gained from them, could I please ask you whether you would consider sharing them with others? Because by sharing them on Facebook and the like, it encourages others to come and look at classic literature and start gaining some of the insights that are already in there. So until the next time, I wish you joy in your reading.